Adam Waller grew up a stone's throw from the ocean in Louisiana. Tommy and Adam Waller were part of a big family, their most memorable and formative times of their lives taking place around the dinner table, where no dish was more looked forward to. No dish brought more joy, more happiness than that of the star of the tides, oysters. Not only did they know how to find them, which is not always easy, but they knew how to open them, which is no easy task. They knew how to cook them, and they knew how to serve them. And for anybody who's ever spent a lot of time cooking oysters, you know that every ounce, every drop of that sauteed oyster is a treasure. Frustrated and with conventional ways of cooking and serving oysters, which always seem to waste too much of the succulent drippings from these grilled and broiled delicacies, Tommy and Adam Waller invented something called the oyster bed. The oyster bed. Now, it's this metal dish that you can both cook and serve oysters in. And it's specifically engineered to catch all of the drippings so that along with a loaf of French bread, every drop of that dish can be sopped up and savored. But inventing the oyster bed was only the beginning. What good is a fantastic idea if nobody knows about it? So after much prayer and discernment and planning, Tommy and Adam Waller decided to go all in. And they pooled their resources, they cleaned their calendars, and they jumped headfirst into that competitive world of kitchenware. In the end, said Tommy, it was a no-brainer. We had the idea, we had the calling. We just had to do this. Now, jumping headfirst into a project that you believe in is not only at the heart of the oyster bed. You can find it, I think it's oysterbed.com. Go look it up. But it's also at the heart of this morning's gospel. As you and I hear this iconic story of four fishermen dropping their nets, leaving behind the safety and security of their own way of life, and going fishing for people. Only James, John, Peter, and Andrew, not looking for a better way to prepare seafood, but looking for a way to satisfy a curiosity and a calling that was probably as vague as it was irresistible. And in daring to get up and go for it, to pay more attention to God's leading than their own comfort, to prioritize the Spirit's voice and urging over their own safety and personal ambition, these early disciples give you and me a critical example and a touchstone for the ways you and I are choosing to follow Jesus today. Have you ever thought about the possibility that James and John and Peter and Andrew might have said no to Jesus? Sorry about it, Jesus. We're really swamped with all these fish. What would Dad say? Or have you ever thought that maybe James and John and Peter and Andrew weren't the first ones that he called? He may have stopped by early and asked Ted and Alex and Bob and Greg. Now we are. What we get here in this gospel is really interesting because it's a very quick and definite response. Did you notice that that word immediately shows up not once but twice in this passage? Why? It's because the life of following Jesus is so head and shoulders above the life that they knew that they just couldn't say no. I'm sure some of you noticed the beginning of our Bible story this morning. It says, when Jesus heard that John the Baptist had been arrested, he withdrew to Galilee. When Jesus heard John had been arrested, that's when he went north from Jerusalem up to Galilee, farther away north of the hinterlands. Now we know that John the Baptist was arrested by Herod down in Jerusalem, in the big city, because he had publicly accused King Herod of not only taking his brother's wife, that's bad, you shouldn't be doing that later, but he accused Herod of a series of abuses and several deeds of injustice against his citizens. He was a real one of these rabble-rousers here, right in the heart of the big city. John was speaking truth to power, not letting Herod get away with these crimes, but causing a ruckus, taking a stand, working to get rid of corruption and trying to bring God's justice to the world, standing up for the right thing. Herod, of course, would have none of that, and we see that when Jesus withdrew to Galilee, that word withdrew in the original language That connotes a retreat, a flee to safety, as if Jesus would also be in danger because he's linked to John's actions, and to Herod's anger. But Jesus' retreat, as you and I know, would not last long. Remember, Jesus was now the heir to John the Baptist. Jesus was the new rabble-rouser in town, the long-awaited one who would speak truth to power even more eloquently, even more powerfully, even more effectively than John the Baptist had ever done. And so it's only a matter of time before Jesus, he's going to leave that hinterland of earth and he's going to go back down to Jerusalem. Only a matter of time. And in doing so, he needed help, which is why we get this calling of the disciples, both last week and this week as well. Jesus is looking for people to help him on his life-changing, world-altering mission of speaking justice and healing, calling out corruption, taking a stand when things aren't fair, especially when it comes to widows and to orphans and to lepers and to those on the margins. It's what compels so many of us here in this nave today to volunteer at the soup kitchen, to give money to the homeless shelter, to open a food shelter in our narthex, to give up our vacations, to go help people in Haiti. You and me, the disciples of all ages, we have this yearning to stand up and do something about suffering, to stand up and do something about the disadvantaged, to help those who are hurting and in need of a hand. And so today, as we go into our annual meeting, what form will this take in the year 2020 for our parish? How is St. David's being called to drop our nets and to follow anew? To work for justice and for healing and for the alleviation of suffering of those in Southfield and the Metro Southfield area. What compelling mission does God have for us in the world ahead? I've been with clergy recently at meetings, and when you talk about churches, and we're all familiar with how a new generation is not going to church as much as the old one, and we say, well, which ones are going to survive? The ones that are relevant, the ones that are actually doing something for the betterment of our lives in here, right, to strengthen us to go out into the world and help, but also what we can do together as a congregation to help the world right outside our door. Now, getting back to our Bible study, for those of us unfamiliar with this region that's talked about in our gospel, around this lake in Capernaum, in those days, there were just a handful of small towns, and those small towns, not what we would call greatly populated. So that in that day and time, Jesus would have been known in that area. Jesus' reputation would have been known. Even the type of work that he was up to would have been rather well known in that region, where he's walking and where he's about to walk by the lake. So that the calling of James and John and Andrew and Peter, who saw Jesus walking down the road toward Jerusalem, it wasn't just some random person who snapped his fingers and put a Houdini hex on the gullible, but it was an invitation for these young men who had been forced to grow up under the thumb of the oppressive Roman Empire, who as good Jews were awaiting the coming of the Messiah to liberate. It was a chance for them to join a compelling movement. And we see young people doing that in every age, don't we? To join a compelling movement, to do something that we all yearn for, and that is to make a mark on this world that will not only stand, but will stand for something. Jesus was tapping into our universal yearning for justice and to do something meaningful and historic, to make that mark that resonated not only with their dreams, but also with their souls. I wonder what that mark looks like for you and me today, and how St. David's is helping us recognize that and to pursue it. The reason St. David's is here is to help you and me hear from God and provide an atmosphere that lets us say yes to God without getting laughed at or banished, and actually nurtures that part of our souls that is yearning for meaning and purpose and opportunities to bring about justice and healing in the world. It's one of the big reasons we're here. We're here for a lot of different reasons, but that's one. Not sure we feed the hungry around here. We house the homeless. We regularly travel to Haiti. But that may be more, but what may be more important than that is to encourage you and me to take on those tasks and many more. Not just within this community, but in our own lives. How is God calling us to reach out and to go for it and to drop the nets as the disciples did? How is God cultivating in us a spirit to speak truth to power, to not just sit down and let the buzz go by, but to stand up and say, wait a minute, something's not right. What's that job going to look like in the year ahead for our parish? What's that life going to look like the year ahead in your life? Maybe God has laid a ministry on your heart this year, outside of this place or inside this place. How will God use us to bring that to fruition? I'm thankful to John Hawks this morning because he was telling me a story in the office earlier this week about that man in Owasso who went to the old Habitat for Humanity because he was going to furnish his man cave. Right? And he goes there and he says, I need an ottoman for my man cave. And so he buys one. It's a bit heavy. Gets it home. And, he puts his feet up on it. It's not soft and cushy. It's kind of hard and lumpy and heavy. Flips it apart. Flips upside down. Opens it up. What's inside? $43,000 in cash. Okay? $43,000 in cash. So what's the first thing you would do if you found that money? It's the first thing you did. Call your lawyer, see if you can keep it. So that's what he did. He calls his lawyer and says, yeah, you can keep it. You bought it. It's yours. You can have it. But this man was a Christian. And very soon another voice came into his ear. One that probably wouldn't let him sleep if he kept it, right? And said, no, that may be the legal thing to do, but it's not the right thing to do. You have to remember that oftentimes things can be legal but not right. And often they can be right and not legal. Anyway, this man knew that he'd have to obey the Holy Spirit speaking inside of him. And this man went down back to Habitat. He tracked down the owner, and you can imagine the owner was pretty happy to hear that $43,000 was in that ottoman, and that it was going to be given back to her granddaughter. And she said, he always paid in cash. I wonder where he got it from. Never went to ATM, just to his ottoman. And so this family gets a heck of a windfall in money. And the man who found it gets a heck of a windfall in grace. Something money can't buy. When he goes to his grave, is he going to wish he kept the $43,000? Probably not. There's a lot of things going on in our lives today. What's going to be the right choice? The right thing versus the legal thing. Friends, whether God's calling us to invent a kitchen gadget or return found money, you and I look to Jesus who's calling us to do the right thing. In this case, to drop your nets and to follow on whatever that next right thing is in your life and in my life. And the time to do so is increasingly short. We're reminded of that nearly every day when we pick up the paper and we see something dramatic has changed. The immediacy of the disciples' call reminds us of God's immediacy in our lives. It reminds us that God is saying, everybody off the bench, folks, onto the field. Everyone here knows that every day goes by faster than the one before. Jesus is not in the business of creating spectators, but players. Each with their own gifts, each with their own jobs. So friends, let us get out there, Team St. David's, into a new year, into a new decade, a new era of worship, outreach, and love for all.